It began with the sound of boots echoing across the marble floor. The dinner hall, lit by a soft golden glow, froze in stunned silence as 12 uniformed soldiers marched in, surrounding the long mahogany table where one of the city's most powerful men, the CEO of Raventech Industries, sat. Forks clattered. Glasses trembled. The murmurs turned into whispers of fear. Something was wrong. Very wrong. And in that thick, suffocating moment, everyone realized that the soldiers weren't there for ceremony. They were there for him. Before we go further, if you believe in kindness, second chances, and the unseen battles people fight every day, please take a moment to toto this channel. It helps stories like this reach more hearts that might need them. The CEO, Victor Lane, had built an empire on steel, software, and ruthlessness. He was the kind of man people didn't say no to, the kind who smiled in press conferences but left trails of broken lives behind boardroom doors. Tonight, he was celebrating another corporate milestone at a prestigious restaurant. Politicians, journalists, and investors filled the tables, raising glasses to the man who had rebuilt the defense industry. But now, 12 soldiers, men in their 40s and 50s, faces hardened by years of service, stood silently around him. Their uniforms weren't polished for parade, they bore the weight of time, faded patches, and medals that told 1,000 untold stories. The room's air shifted. No one dared to move. Then, from a corner near the back, a man in a simple checkered shirt and worn-out jeans slowly stood up. He looked out of place amid the suits and evening gowns. He had tired eyes, the kind that had seen both death and dawn. His name was Daniel Cross, a single father, a veteran, and a man whose life had been quietly unraveling since the war. Daniel had come to the restaurant that night not for luxury, but for his daughter. The restaurant manager had offered him a part-time job as a server, one night only, to cover a sick colleague. The pay would help him buy a used laptop for his 12-year-old, Emma, who had been trying to keep up with online school on a cracked phone. Daniel didn't complain. He'd been through worse. After 2 tours overseas, he'd learned to swallow pain with silence, but as those soldiers surrounded Victor Lane, Daniel's body went rigid. Because he recognized something that no one else in that room did: the patches. The insignias. The subtle marks on their sleeves. These men weren't active-duty soldiers. They were from his old unit, the 9th Recon. The Ghost Wolves. A unit that had been disbanded over a decade ago after a classified mission went horribly wrong. The restaurant doors locked behind them. Gasps rippled. One of the soldiers stepped forward and placed a folder in front of Victor Lane. Inside were photographs, images that made the CEO's smirk vanish. They showed young soldiers in the desert, smiling beside armored trucks bearing Raventech's logo. But there was something else, something darker, in the photos: malfunctioning drones, misfired missiles, and the aftermath of chaos. Victor's company had been the contractor that supplied defective tech to Daniel's unit years ago. It was a scandal buried deep under politics and money. 12 soldiers from the Ghost Wolves had died because of a faulty guidance chip. Their deaths were blamed on human error. But those who survived, men like Daniel, knew the truth. And so did Victor. Daniel felt his heart pounding. He had spent years trying to forget, but now the ghosts of his past stood before him. The 12 men weren't here for violence, they were here for truth, for justice long denied. The crowd began to panic. Security guards moved forward but hesitated when one of the soldiers, a man named Captain Reeves, raised a trembling hand. "Sit down," he said. "You don't know what this man's done." Daniel's throat tightened. He remembered Reeves. The captain who had saved him after the drone strike. The man who had carried their dead brothers on his shoulders while the sky burned. Daniel's hands shook as he placed the tray he was holding onto a nearby table. He didn't plan to get involved. He just wanted to finish his shift, get the money, and go home to his daughter. But fate doesn't ask permission, it drags you back to the battlefield when you least expect it. Victor tried to maintain his composure. He called the soldiers delusional, claiming it was all a misunderstanding. Cameras clicked as journalists started filming. The CEO's PR team whispered frantically, trying to contain the chaos. But Captain Reeves pulled out a small piece of metal from his pocket, a Raventech microchip, the same model that had failed during the mission. He slammed it on the table. The sound echoed like a gunshot. "This killed my men," Reeves said, his voice breaking. "And you got rich off their graves." For a moment, Time stood still, then Victor laughed, a cold, calculated laugh. You think anyone will believe a bunch of washed-up veterans? You signed NDAs. You have nothing. That's when Daniel moved. Slowly, he walked toward the circle of soldiers. Every eye turned to him. His heartbeat was thunder in his ears. He reached the table, took a deep breath, and then, without a word, rolled up his left sleeve. Gasps filled the room. There, etched into his skin, was a long, jagged scar running from his wrist to his elbow. Below it was a tattooed GW9, the Ghost Wolves insignia. He wasn't just another bystander. He was one of them. One of the forgotten. One of the broken. He placed his hand on the table, his voice trembling but strong. He's right, Daniel said. I was there. I saw it. I lost my brothers because of that chip. The restaurant fell completely silent. Cameras focused on him. The CEO's face turned pale. Daniel looked at Victor, not with hate, but with the hollow sadness of someone who had carried grief too long. You told the world it was our fault, he continued. You said we panicked, that we failed our mission. But you never told them your tech failed us first. Reeves stepped closer, tears glinting in his eyes. The other soldiers lowered their weapons, not in surrender, but in solidarity. They didn't come to hurt Victor. They came to expose him. Daniel's presence changed everything. His testimony, his scars, his quiet pain, it made the truth undeniable. Outside, police sirens wailed. Inside, Victor Lane's empire began to crumble. The following days were chaos. News outlets exploded with coverage. Investigations reopened. Whistleblowers came forward. Stock prices fell like dominoes. And Daniel Cross, once a nameless veteran struggling to pay rent, became a symbol of courage and truth. But behind every headline was a man who still had to wake up at 5 a.m. to make breakfast for his daughter. He didn't crave fame. He just wanted peace. A few weeks later, Daniel was invited to a memorial event held for the fallen soldiers of the Ghost Wolves. It was sponsored, ironically, by a foundation newly formed after Victor's resignation. Families of the lost men gathered with photos, medals, and quiet tears. Daniel stood beside Reeves, who now walked with a cane but smiled with pride. When Daniel's turn came to speak, he looked out at the sea of faces, wives, sons, daughters, brothers, and felt his throat close. We fought for a country we loved, he said softly. But sometimes, the hardest battles aren't fought overseas. They're fought right here, against greed, silence, and forgetting. The men we lost, they deserve to be remembered as heroes, not as statistics. As the crowd applauded, Daniel noticed a little girl sitting in the front row, her hand clutching a small folded flag. She reminded him of Emma. That night, when he returned home, his daughter was waiting for him on the couch with a half-burnt grilled cheese sandwich and a proud smile. I saw you on TV, Dad, she said. You were brave. Daniel hugged her tightly, tears slipping down his face. No, sweetheart, he whispered. The brave ones were the ones who never came back. Weeks turned into months. Victor Lane was charged with corporate negligence and fraud. His empire shattered, but Daniel didn't watch the trial. He didn't want revenge, he wanted closure. One evening, as he walked home with Emma after school, a car stopped beside them. A man in a suit stepped out. It was a representative from a veterans organization. They had received donations pouring in after the story went viral enough to start a new program to help veterans find housing and jobs. Mr. Cross, the man said, we'd like you to lead the program. Daniel froze. He wasn't used to being offered opportunities, only burdens. But this one felt different. It wasn't about him. It was about the men who still felt lost, the ones drowning quietly in the shadows. That night, Daniel stood by Emma's bedside as she slept. The soft hum of the city outside mixed with the faint rhythm of her breathing. He thought of the 12 men who had surrounded Victor Lane that night. 12 soldiers seeking justice. 12 ghosts who refused to be silenced. And maybe, he thought, they weren't just there for vengeance, they were there to remind him that his story wasn't over. That sometimes, broken people can still rebuild something good.